Those were her last words to me. No screaming, no tears, no dramatic arguments. Just a calm, almost bored tone, like she was asking me to take out the trash. And like an idiot, I did exactly what she told me. I left, no note, no explanation, nothing. It's been 5 years, and I still don't know if she meant it, or if I was just too broken to stay. The funny thing is, I didn't even pack a bag. I walked out the door with my phone, my car keys, and a heart that felt like someone had twisted it until it snapped. It wasn't even one big fight that led to this. It was 1,000 little things. The quiet dinners where she scrolled through her phone without looking at me. The weekends she worked late, but her lipstick was smudged in a way that didn't scream spreadsheets. The nights I'd hear her whispering on the balcony, laughing softly in a voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I tried pretending I didn't notice. I tried being the good husband, the kind of guy who swallows his pride and keeps pushing. But you can't save a marriage by bleeding yourself dry. And when she told me to disappear, something inside me just cracked. The first few weeks after I left are a blur. I remember sleeping in my car at a truck stop, wondering if I should go back and beg her to take me in, like some pathetic stray dog. But then I'd remember the way she looked at me that night, her eyes colder than the rain dripping off my windshield. I didn't go back. Instead, I drove until I hit a city where no one knew my name and took whatever jobs would keep me breathing. Here's the part I never told anyone. I wasn't just running from her. I was running from the part of myself that believed I was nothing without her. And that part of me didn't die quietly. But 5 years later, fate laughed in my face. I saw her again, by complete accident. She didn't recognize me at first. My hair was longer, I'd lost weight, and my eyes, well, they weren't the same. But when she realized who I was, she collapsed. Right there on the sidewalk, like someone had ripped the ground out from under her. What happened after that is a whole other nightmare, but I'll get there. First, I need to tell you about the secrets I found during those 5 years, and why I think she was more terrified of me coming back than happy to see me. 5 years is a long time to stay silent, but it's amazing how certain memories don't fade. Even after all this time, I can still remember the exact way Clara's voice cracked when she told me to vanish. It wasn't anger, it was worse than that. It was disappointment, as if I'd already been replaced in her mind. And maybe I had. The night I left, I didn't know about him. I didn't know there was another man waiting in the shadows, ready to step into my life like I had never existed. But I learned the truth years later, in the most twisted way possible. During those 5 years, I drifted. I worked at gas stations, washed dishes in dingy restaurants, slept in basements of strangers who were too kind to ask why a grown man looked like he'd lost everything. I kept my head down, avoiding anyone who might recognize me. One night, about 3 years after I disappeared, I ended up in a small bar in a town I barely remember the name of. I'd had too much to drink, and some guy, I think his name was Travis, started talking to me. He told me about his hometown, and I told him nothing. I was too scared of anyone knowing who I was. But then he mentioned something strange. A wealthy couple who had recently moved into his sister's neighborhood. A beautiful woman with icy blonde hair and piercing green eyes. She's stunning, he said, but you can tell she's got secrets. The guy she's with, I don't know, man. There's something off about him. I wouldn't want him as my neighbor. I brushed it off at first. It couldn't be Clara, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Could she have moved on that quickly? Rebuilt her life with someone else like I was nothing but a bad dream? Months later, I found proof. I don't even know why I checked, but I still had access to her social media. She had blocked me everywhere, but one night I used a fake account. There she was, smiling, her hand resting on the arm of a man I'd never seen before. He looked like everything I wasn't: sharp, confident, rich. There were photos of them at fancy restaurants, at the beach, even buying a house together. I sat in that dark motel room staring at the screen until my eyes burned. I wanted to hate her. God, I tried. But all I felt was emptiness, like I'd been erased. That's when I started to spiral. I wasn't angry at her for moving on. I was angry at myself for being the kind of man she could walk away from so easily. I was the guy who fixed her car at midnight, who brought her coffee in bed, who gave up everything to make her smile. And none of it mattered. But something about that man in the photos didn't sit right with me. There was a look in his eyes, cold, almost predatory. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara wasn't just living a happy new life. Something was wrong, and I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. That was the moment I stopped being gone. I started watching her from afar, like some pathetic ghost desperate for closure, and what I found in the shadows of her perfect life made me wish I'd stayed buried forever. I didn't mean to follow her. At least, that's what I told myself the first time I parked across from the neat suburban house with white shutters and a perfect lawn. I had driven for hours, my hands numb on the wheel, not even realizing where I was going until I saw her, Clara, stepping out of a black SUV like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't told me to vanish from her life. She looked different, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't just that she was dressed better, hair styled like she'd stepped out of some glossy magazine. It was the way she moved. There was a stiffness in her shoulders, a glance over her shoulder before she walked into the house, like she was afraid of being watched. I should have driven away. I told myself I would, but instead, I stayed in that car for hours, my heart hammering like I was about to get caught doing something criminal. I wanted to see the man she was with, the guy who had replaced me. When the lights flickered on in the house, I caught sight of him through the kitchen window. He didn't look anything like me. He was tall, clean-cut, dressed in a crisp white shirt even though it was late evening. There was something unsettling about how controlled he seemed, how every movement was precise, calculated. He didn't laugh, not once. And then I saw something that made my stomach twist. Clara was at the kitchen table, but her smile, that smile I once thought was mine, looked forced. He leaned over her, saying something I couldn't hear, and she flinched. I'd never seen her do that with anyone. He put his hand on her shoulder, and for a second, it looked more like a warning than a gesture of affection. I don't know what possessed me, but I started coming back. Not every night, I didn't want to be that guy, but enough to know that something was wrong. I'd see her standing alone in the backyard, smoking a cigarette. She never smoked when we were together, her face pale in the moonlight. She wasn't the same woman I had left behind. It wasn't just that she had moved on, it was like she had built a prison for herself. And this man was the one holding the keys. One night, I saw them fighting. Not shouting, he was too controlled for that. But there was something terrifying about the way he spoke to her. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her face. She looked scared. That was when I realized something I didn't want to admit. Whatever had happened between us, Clara wasn't safe. I started digging into him. His name was Adrian. I found it on a real estate record linked to the house. No social media, nothing online except some vague references to a company that sounded more like a shell operation than a real job. The deeper I looked, the stranger it got. The guy was clean. Too clean. No photos, no history, like he'd been wiped from the internet. That's when I realized that disappearing had been the easy part. Coming back, facing whatever this was going to destroy me. But I couldn't leave, not now. I needed to know the truth. And then it happened. One night, while watching their house, I saw Clara step outside. She looked straight at me, straight into my eyes. And for the first time since the night she told me to vanish, I saw something in her face I couldn't explain. Not anger, not shock. It was fear. Pure fear. The next thing I knew, she fainted on the spot. When Clara collapsed, I panicked. I didn't think, I just ran across the street, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. For years, I'd dreamed about what I would say if I saw her again. Would I scream? Would I beg? Would I demand answers? But now, seeing her crumpled on the ground, I felt none of that. Just fear. I knelt beside her, calling her name, my hands shaking as I tried to lift her head. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, I swear she didn't even recognize me. And then she did. The scream that left her mouth was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not the scream of a woman seeing her long-lost husband, but the scream of someone who had just seen something they thought was dead rise from the grave. "Elliot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't be here. He'll kill you." I froze. My first thought was that she'd gone crazy. Kill me? What was she talking about? But before I could ask, the front door slammed open. Adrian stood there, framed by the light from inside, his face a mask of calm menace. He didn't shout. He didn't even ask what I was doing. He just stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes, like I was an insect crawling too close to his food. I tried to help Clara to her feet, but she pulled away almost violently. "Go!" she hissed under her breath. "Go now! Please!" She looked terrified, and not in a way that made sense if she had simply moved on. This wasn't about me anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. Adrian walked toward us with slow, deliberate steps, like a predator closing in. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, but carrying a weight that made my stomach twist. Clara stammered something about me being a stranger, a lost driver asking for directions, but he didn't buy it. He looked me over from head to toe, and I could see the suspicion forming in his eyes. I left. I didn't want to, but Clara's desperate look, the silent plea in her eyes, forced me to retreat. As I got back in my car, I saw Adrian wrap an arm around her shoulder. Not gently, but like he was claiming territory. She didn't resist. She just lowered her head, like she'd been doing this for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed parked 2 blocks away, my mind running in circles. What had she gotten herself into? And why did she act like seeing me put her in danger? I knew then that I couldn't just leave again. I needed answers, even if they broke me. The next day, I followed Adrian. I expected him to go to some office or job site, but instead, he drove to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It didn't look like a business, no signs, no logos, just a fenced-off building with security cameras pointed in every direction. He stayed there for hours. When he finally left, I snuck closer, my pulse racing. Inside, I saw something I will never forget. Rows of black SUVs, crates stacked like they were ready for shipment, and men moving around with the kind of focus I'd only seen in movies about cartels. Whatever Adrian was involved in, it wasn't anything legal, and Clara was trapped in it. That was the moment I stopped thinking like the pathetic, heartbroken man she told to vanish. For the first time in years, I felt something sharp and alive inside me, a need to protect her, even if she no longer wanted me. If Adrian was dangerous, I needed to find out just how far this went. And I was ready to do whatever it took. I spent the next week shadowing Adrian like a man possessed. I didn't care how dangerous he might be, or what kind of hell I was walking into. All I knew was that Clara was in some kind of trouble, and I couldn't stand by and watch. I rented a cheap room above a hardware store in the next town over, and used it as my base. Every morning, I'd park 2 blocks away from their house, waiting for Adrian to leave. He was a creature of habit. At 8:15 sharp, he would get into that black SUV and drive straight to the warehouse. I started keeping a notebook, scribbling down license plate numbers of other cars coming and going, the times they arrived, how long they stayed. It felt like I was building a map of something ugly and dangerous, but I had no idea just how deep it went. One afternoon, while I was parked near the warehouse, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A man I didn't recognize came out carrying what looked like a locked metal briefcase, handing it off to another, who quickly loaded it into a different SUV. The way they looked around, the nervousness in their movements, this wasn't just shady business. This was criminal, and Clara was living with the man at the center of it. I knew I had to talk to her, but I couldn't just knock on the door with Adrian around. So I waited. I waited for a moment when she would be alone. It came 3 days later, just after sunset. Adrian had left. I followed him far enough to know he was gone for the night. And I went back to the house, my palms sweating so hard it was hard to even grip the steering wheel. I knocked. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, just a few inches, and Clara's face appeared through the gap. She looked older, worn, like the years had been unkind to her. Her once bright green eyes were dull, rimmed with sleeplessness. When she saw me, she didn't look relieved or happy. She looked terrified. "Elliot, you can't be here," she whispered. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Then tell me," I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "Tell me why you told me to disappear. Tell me why you look like you're living with a man who scares you. I'm not leaving this time, Clara, not until I understand." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, as if even the walls might betray her. "He doesn't know you were my husband," she said finally. "If he finds out who you are, you're dead. Do you understand? Dead. You were supposed to stay gone, Elliot. That was the only way I could keep you safe." Her words didn't make sense. None of it did. My hands were shaking as I tried to push the door open wider, but she blocked me. "What is he? What's going on, Clara? Are you in some kind of danger?" I asked. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with tears she clearly didn't want to shed. "You don't understand. He's not just dangerous. He owns everything here. The police, the businesses, the people. You can't fight him." I wanted to tell her I didn't care. I wanted to tell her I'd burn down the whole world to get her out. But before I could, a pair of headlights turned the corner, illuminating the driveway. Clara's eyes widened in horror. "Go," she whispered harshly. Please, if he sees you. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran back to my car and drove like hell out of that neighborhood. But as I parked in my dingy room that night, I couldn't shake the look on her face. She wasn't just scared for herself, she was scared for me. Which meant that, somehow, I was already in deeper than I realized. And I was right. Because the next morning, I woke up to find my car's tires slashed and a note stuck to the windshield. It was just 2 words, scrawled in thick black ink. Stop looking. I stared at that note for a long time, my breath fogging up the windshield of my beat-up car. Stop looking. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Someone knew I was watching. Someone knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And the worst part? I hadn't exactly been subtle. I'd been circling their neighborhood, hanging around the warehouse, probably sticking out like a sore thumb to anyone paying attention. For all I knew, Adrian already suspected who I was. My heart hammered in my chest as I crouched next to the car, scanning the street, expecting him to step out of the shadows any second. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of town, but the image of Clara's face, pale, hollow, filled with fear, kept me glued there. I couldn't run, not now. That night, I made a decision that I can't say I regret, but I do wish I had been smart enough to prepare for. I was going to find out what Adrian was hiding in that warehouse. I spent the day watching from a distance, my nerves eating away at me like acid. Adrian's SUV came and went at its usual times. Around midnight, when the warehouse went dark and the last of the vehicles rolled out, I decided to make my move. I dressed in black, pulled my hood low, and parked my car far enough away to avoid drawing attention. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would give me away as I crept through the fence, my hands shaking as I cut the thin lock with a pair of bolt cutters I'd borrowed from the hardware store downstairs. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, smelling of oil and something metallic I couldn't place. The place was massive, rows of crates stacked high with no labels, just black stenciled numbers. I crept through the shadows, every creak of the floor making my pulse spike. I knew I had to move quickly. I didn't know when Adrian might come back, but I had a feeling he wouldn't take kindly to me, snooping around his operation. I found a crate that was partially open and pried it wider, with a metal bar I found nearby. Inside were rows of strange-looking devices, sleek, black, and wrapped in thick plastic. I couldn't tell what they were, but they looked expensive and dangerous, like something that shouldn't be in a random warehouse. As I reached in to pull one out, I heard the sound that still haunts me to this day. A single footstep, soft but deliberate, echoing through the silence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Then, a voice, low and calm, cutting through the darkness. I told you to stop looking. My blood turned cold. It wasn't Adrian. It was someone else, taller, bulkier, dressed in black from head to toe. He stepped out from behind a stack of crates, and in that moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with Adrian's temper. I was trespassing in a place that belonged to men who had no reason to let me leave alive. I ran. I don't even remember how I got out, just the sound of heavy footsteps chasing me and the distant click of a gun being cocked. Somehow, I made it back to the fence and bolted for my car, my hands trembling so badly I could barely jam the keys into the ignition. When I got back to my room, I was drenched in sweat, shaking uncontrollably. I knew I'd made a mistake, but I also knew one thing for certain. Clara wasn't just trapped with a dangerous man. She was trapped in something bigger, something that smelled like organized crime or worse. And now, they knew I was watching. The next morning, I found another note slipped under my door. This one was longer, scrawled in the same heavy black ink. You get one chance to leave. Take it. But I couldn't leave, not after what I'd seen. If I walked away now, I'd be abandoning her all over again. And that was when the thought hit me. Maybe Clara hadn't told me to disappear all those years ago because she didn't love me. Maybe she was trying to save me from exactly this. I decided I was going to confront her again, no matter what it took. But this time, I wouldn't knock on her front door like an idiot. This time, I would corner her when Adrian wasn't around and force her to tell me the truth. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew deep down that the truth might just destroy whatever was left of me. I waited 3 days before making my next move. 3 days of pacing the floor in my cheap rented room, chewing my nails to the bone, and imagining every worst-case scenario. I kept seeing those crates in the warehouse, those shadowy men who moved like they belonged to a different world. one where people like me didn't get second chances. I knew I was on borrowed time. That note under my door wasn't an empty threat. I could feel their eyes on me. But the thought of Clara's terrified face when she saw me, the way she begged me to leave, wouldn't let me rest. If I didn't confront her now, I'd never forgive myself. I waited for Adrian to leave the house. That night he left earlier than usual, his SUV rolling out of the driveway with the same precise, deliberate pace as always. I parked far enough away to avoid suspicion and cut through the back of the neighborhood, approaching Clara's house from the rear fence. It felt insane, sneaking around like some criminal, but I couldn't just walk up to the door anymore. Adrian had surely warned her about me, or worse, was testing to see if I'd show up again. The back porch light was off. I crouched behind a tree and waited until I saw her silhouette through the kitchen window. She was alone, washing dishes, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying invisible weights. My heart sank. This wasn't the same Clara I had left behind years ago. She looked hollow, like every bit of fire and laughter had been drained from her. I tapped softly on the glass. She jumped, dropping a plate that shattered in the sink. When she turned and saw me standing there in the dark, her face went white. I raised my hands, mouthing the words, "Please, just talk to me." After a tense moment, she glanced toward the front door, then back at me, and reluctantly unlocked the back door. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" she hissed, pulling me inside and shutting the door quickly. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Then explain it to me, Clara," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me what's going on. Tell me why you told me to disappear. Tell me who the hell this guy really is, because I swear to God, you're not safe with him." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war in her eyes. Finally, she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "You were never supposed to come back," she said quietly. "Elliot, Adrian isn't who you think he is. He's not just some guy I moved on with. He owns people. He controls things you can't even imagine. I thought if I made you leave, if I told you to disappear, he wouldn't see you as a threat. He doesn't like loose ends. He would have killed you back then, and he'll do it now if he even suspects we're talking." The words felt like a punch to my gut. "So what is he? Some kind of gangster?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked at me, her lips trembling. "Worse. He's connected to people who run money through this entire city. Drugs, weapons, and they're untouchable because they've got the police and half the government on their payroll. I didn't know what he was at first. I swear, Elliot, I didn't. By the time I realized who he really was, I was already too deep." She paused, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You think I wanted this? You think I chose this life? I told you to go because I didn't want you getting pulled into it. But now that you're here..." She stopped, glancing at the window like someone might be listening. My pulse quickened. "Now that I'm here, what?" I pressed. "He knows about you," she whispered. "He doesn't know you're my ex-husband yet, but he knows you've been watching. He sent someone after you. That note you found? That was a warning. Next time, it won't be a note. It'll be a bullet." I felt my hands ball into fists, my anger boiling over. "Then come with me. Tonight. We leave, both of us. We get out of here before it's too late." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "It's not that simple. You don't just leave a man like Adrian. You disappear one way or another, but not alive. If I even try, he'll find us. He always does." I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to think that she had been living in this quiet nightmare for years, all while I was out there wandering like some broken ghost. But the fear in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't lying. Then, a sound. A car engine outside. Her face went pale. "You have to go. Now," she whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. "Please, Elliot, before he..." The front door handle rattled. Adrian was back. The sound of the front door unlocking froze me in place. Clara's fingers dug into my arm, as if she could physically push the panic out of me. "Go. Through the back," she whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure Adrian could hear it. I darted toward the back door, but as I reached for the handle, I stopped. I was done running. I'd been running for 5 years. From her, from the truth, from everything. I couldn't keep leaving her behind in this hell. The front door opened. Adrian stepped in with that eerie calmness that made my blood run cold. His eyes landed on Clara, scanning her like a hawk searching for weakness. "Why is the door unlocked?" he asked, his tone soft but edged with suspicion. Clara stammered something about forgetting, but I could see the fear trembling at the edges of her voice. Before I could think, I stepped into the kitchen doorway. "Because I was here," I said, my voice steady, even though my insides were screaming. Adrian's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that hums like electricity before a storm. Then, very slowly, he smiled. "You're the one who's been watching," he said. "I should have known." He started toward me, and I swear, every instinct told me I was about to die. But Clara stepped between us, her hands shaking. "Don't," she said firmly. "You heard him, and I'm gone. I'll walk out that door and I'll never look back. I don't care who you are or what power you think you have." Her voice was trembling, but I'd never seen her so fierce. Adrian's smile faded. He stopped, studying her for a long moment. There was something in his eyes, something dark, but also calculating. And then, just like that, he laughed. "You too," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'm not the villain you think I am. I've kept you safe, Clara. But if this man wants you so badly, maybe he should try keeping you alive." It didn't make sense. I expected violence, a fight, something. But instead, Adrian turned and left, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence felt deafening. Then Clara collapsed against me, her hands gripping my jacket like she was afraid I'd disappear again. We left that night. We didn't pack much, just what we could grab in 5 minutes, and we drove. We didn't stop until we reached a town where no one knew us, a quiet place where the air didn't feel heavy with fear. I kept expecting Adrian's men to come after us, but they never did. Maybe he really meant what he said. Maybe letting us go was his way of winning some twisted game I'll never understand. In the weeks that followed, Clara and I talked for hours, for days, about everything. About how she had fallen into Adrian's world, how she thought pushing me away would save me. I told her about my years of wandering, the nights I hated myself for not fighting harder, and somehow, through all that pain and wreckage, we found a way back to each other. I'm not naive enough to think we're fixed, or that the scars are gone. But we're here. We're alive. And for the first time in years, I'm not running anymore. Sometimes late at night, I think about Adrian in that warehouse. I think about the note that told me to stop looking. But then Clara will roll over in her sleep and rest her hand on my chest, and I know that whatever darkness is still out there, we found a light worth fighting for. I disappeared once. I won't do it again.